Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich talks with community leaders about issues in the public safety arena. Sponsored by River Ridge Hardware.
Good afternoon. This is Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich with the Sheriff's Report. Today, in studio with us, we have Tony Anderman, who is the director for the Sheriff's Office Training Arm. And Tony worked for the state of Washington Criminal Justice Training Commission for 21 years. He's one of the best curricular writers that I've run into, and I knew that if we were able to get Tony and hire him, we could take the Sheriff's Office training to the next level. And Tony's done a marvelous job doing just that. Today we're going to talk about an issue that is always being presented anymore within the community, legislature, and that's law enforcement training, the need for different training. The thing is, folks, this training's been around for a very long time. It's been around my entire career, different names, different times, verbal judo, different flavors of it throughout my 30-year career. So I think it's really important that people understand some of the things that we're talking about, Tony, about when we talk about social interaction, perceptions, biased, implicit biased, and what kind of training that we're actually trying to accomplish with that, because what we're going to present today is just like the tip of the iceberg of that subject matter, emotional intelligence, the whole gambit. We may slightly touch on them, but we don't even get to them. We slightly touch on implicit bias training in this, in that it's not the full mill deal when it comes to the implicit bias training even. So Tony was very key and instrumental in helping to write this particular curricula. I believe it was, 7 years ago, Tony?
Yeah,
6?
2012, 2014.
Yes. And they did it under a grant from the military, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, DARPA.
And you teamed up with a few organizations in doing that. You actually worked for CJTC at the time. Vinny, could you throw up the first slide? So this is the group that came together on this training, WSU, DARPA, and CJTC while you worked there. So, Tony, I'm going to pass the baton and let you talk about the training and the why.
Sure. Currently, the Sheriff's Office has a class called Interactions and Perceptions, and the foundation of that course came from a research-based project that I had the honor to work on from 2012 to 2014. Under the tutelage of Dr. Brian Vila out of Washington State University, and they're still doing current data gathering around bias, around implicit bias, explicit bias. In fact, Dr. Lois James, Dr. Steve James, two of the leading researchers in this area. Some more areas that they do research in is in sleep studies for both law enforcement and other areas. And with that, DARPA funded this project. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency funded a project over a 2-year period with multiple vendors, multiple parties involved. And I was working with the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission at the time. So through that project, the foundation of the project, it was evidence-based, it was peer-reviewed. Obviously, the two main individuals that I worked for was Washington State University and also the CJTC, the Criminal Justice Training Commission. And the project's name was the Strategic Social Interaction Module. And out of that project came a 40-hour class called the Tactical Social Interaction course. Now, into the next slide, on slide 3, the project's main goal was to design uniquely encompassing methods to train personnel on how to strategically interact with and adapt to people in places foreign to them, regardless of specific culture or type of engagement. As we finish this paragraph here, in short, how to make good strangers who can properly assess and adapt in order to socially engage in any scenario. let's just go back in time. In 2010, 2009, the military was looking at how they were engaging overseas and how the young troops were actually interacting and communicating with those in the Middle East. Were they providing them the right amount or the necessary training to properly engage and gain trust with individuals over there within a certain period of time, say within 30 seconds to a minute, because their lives depended on it, literally depended on it. So they brought in these different groups, everybody from special forces to universities. I worked with great scientists from Georgetown University, the linguistics unit out of there, but they brought multiple teams together to help the military develop this content. Again, it was a 2-year project, but the law enforcement side of the house provided a lot of the material and a lot of the research for these individuals, especially for Dr. James's team. So there's many hours of videos that they reviewed. They went out on many hours of ride-alongs with law enforcement, and literally, I'll just put it very easily, they looked at what a good police officer looked like and a, I guess, poor engagement of a police officer. And through that, they developed this content.
So, a lot of rhetoric sometimes gets pushed out there that, we're being militarized as law enforcement, which, folks, I will tell you that is not happening. That is one of the biggest myths that has ever been pushed by activists and quite frankly, the media. We are not being militarized. If anything, we, law enforcement, have contributed to training the military in how to properly engage in very tense situations with cultures that are, quite frankly, foreign to the officer being involved in it. So I think that's one of the highlights to this is they actually looked at law enforcement and how we're engaging, took the good and the bad, and put the class together.
That is correct. Obviously with many different variable data sets as well. And through that, we then took that foundational course along with another course that we developed at CJTC during that time. It was their bias course. We brought that course over to the Spokane County Sheriff's Office, combined the two courses, and now we have the interaction and perception course.
And that was in 2017, if I remember correctly.
Correct. Beginning 2017, that is correct. So we're on slide 4 now. So right now we have a program, the Interactions and Perceptions program, that we took as an organization and said, hey, how can we better the delivery of training to our deputies to assist our community to the best of our ability?
And there's one piece that I don't think very many people may remember. The Spokesman Review did cover this, that we were...
Oh, that's right. That's
we
correct.
actually had these courses certified through IADLES, which is an international association of basically all the post directors, which are law enforcement academy post directors in the United States. We were the first agency to ever do so, and we actually got recognized for doing that.
That is correct. We got an innovation award for putting these puzzles or the pieces of the puzzle together to provide this training to the department. Yeah. That is correct. Yep. So with that in line and the work that we've done and also the lessons that we learned, we now provide a 16-hour course to all of our new deputies. And again, the foundation of that course is from that research from 2012 and 2014. The class length that we deliver at this point in time is 16 hours. We have 8 hours in the classroom, and then we have 8 hours in the community. And here's a beautiful thing about the classroom. We do not lecture in a classroom. There's no PowerPoint. It's student-centered, no PowerPoint. It's a team environment, and we can have anywhere from 18 to 28 students in a classroom. And the nice thing is when we send them out into the community, they actually get the opportunity to meet and greet strangers and learn how their own biases affect that communication, how their own body language, if it's not appropriate body language during a conversation, how they can adapt and correct that body language to have that communication opportunity be a trustworthy communication.
And you actually video this,
so
they can see it on a video that they're at that interaction and they can critique themselves. And when you first did this, you sent them out in plain clothes and they had an interaction, and then you sent them out in uniform and they had an interaction. And one of the things that they found was those interactions were effective by simply a change of clothes.
Yes, yes. And that's an interesting part. We do videotape from a distance, and they realize that when they're in civilian clothes, they're more uncomfortable, which is interesting. And when they put their uniform on, they are more confident, but at the same time, they're still nervous. And they're based on that, the system and the biometrics that's happening at that time, they realize that they are nervous. They realize that they have uncontrollable actions that the individual they're talking to see. And the individuals will actually ask them, the community members will ask them, are you nervous? Why are you nervous? No, I'm not nervous. Well, they are. They don't realize that they are nervous, and they're showing that to the community members. So we're looking at the competencies right now. Through that course, we have 7 competencies. And again, research-based, peer-reviewed, through all the research with the assistance and tutelage with Dr. Brian Vila and Dr. Lois James, the 7 competencies were placed on the table, and here's what we teach to. Pre-planning, observe and assess, contact, engage, self-control, adapt, repair, and disengage. Let's talk about this, Sheriff. When a deputy goes out and before they even enter that call or when they're receiving a call, what are they doing?
You know, if they're thinking correctly, when that call comes out, they're starting to think about, all right, the nature of the call for one, and how they're going to approach that scene. If they're coming into something that's violent, they're totally different than if it's just let's say a neighborhood dispute, which not necessarily means that it's not going to go violent. I've seen that happen before, or just a simple welfare check. All those things are going through their heads of, okay, here's the things I need to think about. Here's a checklist I'm going through in your head, and let's say it is something that's a high risk. You're actually thinking about where you're going to park,
right?
How you're going to approach the house, because if you mess that up, let's say you park right in front of the suspect's house, that could be a very bad day.
That is correct. So when we're pre-planning, we're teaching pre-planning, not only are we teaching the tactical side of it, we're also teaching the human interaction side of it. How are we going to approach them? What will that look like? What's the best approach? Just like you said with the car, what's the best approach when we walk up to a stranger? Do we just walk up to the stranger at 12 o'clock in front of them direct, or do we walk easily up to the side to help them feel more comfortable with our approach? Also, during pre-planning, we're actually looking at what our thought process is. Do we have a bias or a story about what we're observing at that point in time? And what is that bias? What are we thinking about? And is it something that we should be asking more clarity about, more questions about? Then we go into the observe and assess. What are they doing? How are they managing themselves? How are we managing ourselves? And I have to back up, Sheriff. In this course, we look a lot at the internal structure of that deputy. Here's what we realized out of the DARPA program and working with the Marines and also law enforcement agencies during the testing run of this. Deputies and officers really don't understand when I say this, I have to be careful because I'm not the expert at this, but what we found is when we talk about their own value sets and their background, the majority realize that they really don't understand who they are, let alone we're trying to teach them how to interact with others. So we have to teach them how to actually discover who they are first, how they tick, how they operate, how they breathe, how they don't breathe. So when we have them actually do the observation, we're actually having them look at the baseline of the individual and the baseline of myself, the deputy or the officer. 2, we're also having them look at the anomalies. What are the anomalies happening around us, the environment, and do those anomalies match what I'm observing? So if I'm talking with somebody in the mall or I'm approaching somebody in the mall, they're shopping in a mall, that's a baseline behavior, somebody's shopping. But if I'm approaching somebody, they're not shopping, they're pacing, they're scratching their head, they're sweating, it's 30 degrees outside, is that an anomaly? And how do I approach them? Respectfully, but at the same time tactically, right? As an officer yourself, Sheriff, when we approach somebody, we have to be worried about what type of things tactically.
You never know exactly how that contact's going to go because you don't know this person, and you don't know the dynamic that they've experienced. They may have had a very bad day.
Yes.
And their response to you could reflect that very bad day. Now, if you take that response and flip it into, okay, I've had a bad day too, so don't don't give that to me,
Right.
pretty soon, right out front, you're at loggerheads. But if you approach it in that it's not necessarily that they're a bad person or they've done something bad, it's just that they've had a bad day, you can empathize with that individual and help bring them back down.
I think you hit on a key word, empathize. Not only empathize with the individual, but help myself, the officer, deputy, empathize with what I'm thinking, right? How do I de-bias my thoughts as I'm talking with you, the stranger? And that gets into the contact and engage, and I'm going to ask your expertise on this. When you're actually making that contact, you're engaging with this individual as just a social contact, what's your body language? What should it be saying to that individual?
It should be saying that I'm not a threat. That's what it should be saying. I'm not the enemy. I'm here to help. And again, the nature of the context. Let's say it's late at night. Somebody's walking around a business. That doesn't happen often at 2:30 in the morning.
Right.
But you're still making that contact. There are certain things that you have to have in your head, but you don't necessarily automatically go burglar, because it could be the business owner. Or it could just be, somebody that's out for a walk, again, had a bad night, maybe an argument, had to go cool off. There's all kinds of dynamics that come into that thought process when you walk up on somebody, and you are always assessing that environment, and you're looking for certain cues, verbal cues, all the way through just the nature of, this is odd. Why are you rattling the door of that business and you don't own it?
Correct. And you brought up another good point. I'm not a threat. Approach them as I'm not a threat, but at the same time, you said I still have to be thinking about the tactical sensitivity around this conversation. Is what will happen if something suddenly switched, the anomaly popped up? How do you react to that tactically? But you're still approaching that I'm not a threat, though you're in a uniform. Going through the processes, we realize officers that when we took their weapons away and they approached in civilian clothes, what were they doing? What do you think they were doing once we took the weapons away?
Their hands were naturally going where
yes. So
regardless, it's kind of ingrained. Case in point. One of the first agencies I worked with, one of the things you did is you went and did bar checks, make sure everything's safe inside. So what's the natural tendency? You tend to move your sidearm to the front so you can pin it in with your arm, and you develop those habits, and sometimes it gets so ingrained you don't even know you're doing it anymore.
Correct. And here's a great short story for you. We were doing this class during a Hoop Fest, I think it was 2013, 2014. And we sent a detective, I think they were from the west side, civilian clothes. We took the weapons away. That's very uncomfortable for a police officer to have done. We took him away. What was he doing walking up? When he walked up to a basketball team out there, he was actually checking his belt, checking the weapon. And the first thing one of the team leaders said, "What are you, a cop or something?" So I approached and asked the question, how did you know that? Well, he was checking his belt like he was checking for a weapon, and his stance was like this, like most police officers do. And why was he talking to us in the first place? So I brought everybody together in that team and said, here's something we can learn. What would you like to see an individual approach you? What would you like to see it differently? Well, clearly, you can still, and they even said it, you can still be tactical with us, but be respectful with us. You don't have to check for your weapon. We're just sitting here bouncing a ball, drinking our Gatorade. Who are we, right? That's the approach they wanted to take. And the officer learned a good lesson at that point in time.
And again, that takes the officer thinking about that, because, again, when 5 years into this job, things become remote. I remember when I promoted to detective, I'd worked graveyard so long that when you work graveyard, your interior light, so maybe you can write your reports and all that, is right here. When I went to turn on my interior light of my own vehicle, where was I reaching? I mean,
right.
Just without even thinking about it.
Right. And these are kinesics, body language, that a police officer or a person of authority will demonstrate, which right off the bat, a stranger on the street who has the ability to recognize that will see that as some sort of not a threat, but realize there's something wrong on the other side and recognize what you're doing. And then we're going into self-control and adapt and repair. So we approach somebody, and again, I'm going to go back to your expertise here, Sheriff. You approach somebody, and you think this conversation, or you assume this conversation is going well, and suddenly the individual goes from 0 to 10 that quick. How do you actually adapt or repair? Because you may have done it. You may have caused this situation to occur, maybe a word you chose, the body language. How do you adapt and repair to that?
I've had that happen. You think the conversation is going very well, and suddenly it spikes. And the first thing that you're thinking is, okay, what changed? And first thing you do is you check the environment.
Well said.
What changed in the environment? Nothing changed in the environment. Then it's, oh, wait a minute. It's how I said something. And then you have to, as the slide said, you adapt. And then you got to fix that.
That is correct.
And you got to bring them back down.
Yep.
And sometimes it's, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that that way. That was not intended to sound the way it sounded. And you start, that apology at times is all it takes. I'm sorry I offended you. I didn't mean to.
That you're hitting on some good topics there. Is how do we make that happen? If we recognize our own bias, our own critical thinking, our own problem solving, more importantly, our own emotional intelligence that affects others, if we can recognize that, and we talked about this before, Sheriff, is civility. If we had civility in our community, would we be sitting here talking about this course?
No.
Probably not. So because of what is happening and what's going on, and through our training and through our processes, we have to provide training to remind ourselves that, hey, we're human beings, and it's okay. We're human beings and we have biases. But how do we de-bias? How do we control that process or our own emotions in a conversation? More importantly, how do we help that individual in front of us control their own emotions and their own ability to talk with us in a very respectful way? So as we disengage with the conversation, what's the appropriate way to disengage from a community member, Sheriff?
That's sometimes the most awkward aspect of the entire conversation or contact, because we make contact with a variety of different cultures out there, and America is a land of several different cultures, be it ethnic, racial, it doesn't matter, and each of those cultures have different nuances. So you can actually offend somebody by the way you disengage. So you kind of have to, take your time. And the way I always did it was, all right, here's what I've heard you say. Here's what I think you ask me. You're asking of me, and have I missed anything? Because I don't want to leave and not having everything. And that gives them a chance to, no, you've got it. And it's just simple thank you, and you're able to disengage.
The simple thank you, and also the meaningful thank you. What they tell us when we talk about micro expressions on the face, cross-culturally, we know that a micro expression in any culture, that it's the same. A genuine smile is the same. So if you give them a thank you with a genuine smile, they're going to see that. But if you give them a thank you with just something that is made up, they're going to sense that. So a disengagement, genuine disengagement is key. So competencies, pre-planning, observe and assess, contact and engage, self-control, adapt, repair, and disengage are the 7 competencies. So the foundation of the course, again, the foundation came from DARPA, is to demonstrate to enhance law enforcement personnel ability to adapt to and navigate actual diverse or culturally diverse environments, as well as complex social situations, enhance students' self-awareness, analytical ability, situational awareness. So what we're talking about there is the analytical ability to problem solve, to critically think, the situational awareness, your environment, which you talked about so well, Sheriff, self-awareness, which is your emotional intelligence, and your interactive skills. Increase constitutionality around the use of force issues. This is critical, that we discuss this and we make sure that we enhance that within our deputies' environment. And more importantly, officers' integration into the multicultural communities. And we have multiple multiple cultures within our own community. And that last bullet item, enhancement of existing procedural justice programs. So as we bring more procedural justice programs into our organization, Sheriff, this will be a great fit. The development, the design, and more importantly, the implementation would be a great fit. And that slide, the next slide is to provide relevant context for debriefing, interactions with the community. And this is key, focusing on how personal background and innate assumptions can frame encounters or influence vital decision-making. So what does that mean? And just in brief, we know going into a conversation that we have an innate process, a story about others. But how do we use that to enhance the conversation versus decrease the trust within the conversation? And last, how adaptation and biases during an encounter can increase accurate and improve interactions with citizens. That is the ultimate goal. Increase trust, make sure we're professional, and improve interactions with the citizens.
One of the questions that is always going to be answered, and I think we're coming close to the end of this one. So I want to set you up for the next round, because we're going to do two parts of this particular series here. Is how do we know we're actually improving their bias recognition and helping them to overcome their biases? Because that is one of the hardest things I think there is to mitigate. So, folks, this is Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich with the Sheriff Report. We'll be back with part 2 with Tony Anderman, and we'll talk more about the training that we're providing our deputies and how we're trying to improve the quality of that training.
Thanks for watching. Ask the host a question, recommend a guest, or check out any of our other programs on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or SpokaneTalksMedia.com. Sponsored by River Ridge Hardware.
Hi, Larry Myers again at River Ridge Hardware. Back in our garden center. It's changed a little bit. We have lots of greenery though. We have Christmas trees at $39.99. We have pretty much everything you'd ever want in Christmas. The icicle lights, from white to straight blue to multicolor. I have these cute little shelf snowmen. One of the cool things that we have at River Ridge Hardware, which maybe one other in the United States, is a full custom picture framing shop and all kinds of Christmas decor that you can decorate your tree. Go on our website at riverridgehardware.com. Feel free to call us at 509-328-0915. We're still offering curbside delivery and delivery outside the neighborhood within a 5-mile radius with just a purchase of $25 or more. So let us help you in this shopping time. Shop local, shop often, and have a Merry Christmas.